All right, so this is a series I've been super excited to start, and it's called a Get to Know series. So in this first episode, I'm talking with Blake. I'm shaped more like an orangutan than a human, Lehew. Blake has 3 junior world championships and 2 silver medals. As of this recording, on open powerlifting, if you go to overall raw males, Blake is currently ranked 31st. Since 2014, Blake has either got first, second, or completely bombed out in all of his meets. Hope you enjoyed the interview. If you'd like to see more like this, make sure to hit that like button down below. All right, Blake, thanks for taking time today to talk to me. I would like to say we have a yearly tradition of only seeing each other once a year, so this does fulfill that. So we're
Oh,
good for another 11 months.
until 2022.
Yeah, we're done until then. So getting right into it, I just want to ask, what was life like before powerlifting, and then what got you into the sport?
Man, I've always been the little guy. Like, I mean, I wear a large shirt now, but that hasn't always been the case. uh, Growing up in Texas, like football was, I don't want to say it was the only thing to do, but yeah, it's pretty much the only
But
thing
it's
to do.
Texas.
Yeah, no, it's Texas. Like, you got to play football.
Right.
And so I played football from first grade all the way until my freshman year in high school. But one thing that I quickly noticed lifting weights with everybody, even in middle school, like by 8th grade, I was benching more than anybody in high school.
Wow.
Yeah. So, that I realized I was strong. Everybody else realized I was strong. And then like everybody else started to change in other ways, and they weren't as strong as I was, but they were much better on the football field because I've been 5'5" since I was 14.
Right.
It's not really a whole lot I can do at that point because I
Yeah.
just stopped growing and everyone else kept growing.
Yeah.
So, I quickly realized that football was not going to be it for me. That's not what I was built to do.
Right.
And then a friend of mine asked me if I had heard of the powerlifting team, and I was like, powerlifting? What's that?
Yeah.
And they were like, well, you just compete by like lifting weights. And I'm like, I can do that. I
All
can do
right.
that.
That's what you've been doing.
Yeah. And I was like, do you think I'd be good at it? And they were like, Blake, nobody benches as much as what you do at your body weight. Which is kind of funny now, like thinking about that, because my bench is kind of what got me into the sport because it was so big compared to everyone else's. But over the past few years, that's of the 3, that's been my weakest.
It's holding you back the most now.
Yeah. Like, I'm not saying I think it's weak, but it's definitely comparably weaker than what it was then.
Right.
You know?
Like right now, you're definitely deadlift pulls you through your meets, but your bench kind of is keeping you along.
Well, lately deadlift's been kicking me out.
when you don't drop it. So
yeah.
going back to 8th grade, what were you benching then?
I believe at the end of 7th grade, I benched 160. And at the end of 8th grade, maybe it was like 240, I want to say. And I was 13.
Yeah.
So I was young. So I've always been the youngest in my class.
Yeah.
So I was 14 as a freshman, 13 as an 8th grader.
Right. I would like to say my first meet as a sophomore in college, I benched 242. So you got me by a few years on that one.
But see, I mean, like the best bench in my high school before then was like 225 at that time.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was
you just shot through it.
Yeah.
At what point did you, I guess, realize that deadlift? What time did your deadlift and your squat kind of take off then?
Oh man, that's actually kind of surprised people a lot with this question. When I first started, deadlifting was like the bane to my existence. Like my deadlift was horrendous. Like, it didn't look horrendous per se.
Yeah.
But by the time I graduated high school, my best equipped pull, conventional, was 500. No, 500 in THSPA, and then I did on a deadlift bar, I was able to pull 530 single ply.
Yeah.
So, and then going through high school, my squat was kind of on par with everybody else's. Like I was within 20 pounds of number one, but I would get like fifth because everybody in the top, like the top 1% of the weight class were all at about the same on squat.
Right.
And then it kind of came down to bench or deadlift, but everybody else was typically a puller. But I would outbench them by over 100 pounds single ply, and they couldn't outpull me by over 100 pounds.
Right.
So I squatted the same, and then I outbenched the shit out of them, but then they outpulled the shit out of me, but it just wasn't enough. And my deadlift really started taking off, I'd say about my sophomore year. Going into my sophomore year in college. So I bombed out of collegiate nationals my freshman year, which was a really humbling experience because, I mean, I came in seated second place as a freshman. You know, like I thought I was hot shit. I won state my senior year.
Yeah.
And like I was cocky. And I made sure that was the last time me being cocky was going to be a factor in my lifting. So I decided to, after that meet, I decided to take a couple steps back, do something new, and tried sumo. Because my maxes on sumo and conventional deadlift at that time were about the same. I believe when I tested them, it was about 500 pounds. And then in a 3-month period during the summer, I was able to put 40 pounds on my conventional and about 100 on my sumo.
Wow.
So my sumo went from 5 to 600 in 3 months, and my conventional went from 5 to 540.
Which is still impressive.
I was like, yeah, no, that's why I'm like, yeah, like 40 pounds in 3 months, like I'd kill for that now.
Yeah, no kidding. Now you're like 40 pounds in 2 years. Okay, I'll take that too.
Yeah, no, even that's great.
Yeah.
But yeah, when that happened, I was like, man, I never imagined myself being a deadlifter, but here we are, like 20 pounds away from the world record at that time, raw. And I've been a single ply lifter since I'd started lifting.
Right.
So I did raw just for funsies and realized I'm not that bad.
Yeah. Like there is some base strength there, you know. You gotta at least be strong to do single ply. It's not all equipment, you know.
Yeah.
And I think it's really cool you touched on how that meet, you know, you kind of when you bombed out, like that was a big time for you because I think a lot of people post their best stuff on social media. And so to kind of talk about, you know, this time was actually really bad. And here's what I learned from it. I think that's just something really important that we can take away that even someone as good as you are, you still have meets that you bombed out. And then you still learn from it. And, you know, we were talking before this how it's been 7 years that you either got first, second, or you bomb out. So it's all or nothing with you.
Yeah,
That's
no,
okay.
I mean, inconsistency is kind of what I try to avoid, but you can only control so many variables on meet day. Like you can only prepare for so much.
And that's important too. Like it's going to be outside of your hands sometimes, and it is what it is.
Yeah, like sometimes you don't know. You might get chalk that feels like baby powder, and you're like, well, I screwed up because I didn't bring my own chalk.
Yeah. And then your hand ripped open at your last one. And
oh my God.
That whole scenario too. So, like I said, you know, I think I went back and saw 11 years of you lifting, 53 different meets I counted, which is honestly impressive as far as just doing all that. I feel sore after a few days, maybe a couple of weeks, but like to do 4 to 5 meets every year for 11 years, that's a lot to it.
Yeah, well, and it's a little different in high school too. So something I didn't have any perspective on when I was younger was like high school powerlifting in Texas. It's not like high school powerlifting anywhere except maybe Louisiana, Mississippi. Even in some of the other, do what?
And why's that?
So the way it works is it's like a track meet. You have a meet every weekend. And the coaches send you to meets every weekend.
And you're competing every weekend.
So you're balling out every Saturday.
Right.
I mean, if you choose to, if you have the option, like you're going, you don't know any better because your coaches aren't saying, hey, no, like you should, really just plan to perform well at one meet and then
Right.
not compete, save your body and compete at regionals and state after you qualify.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's actually one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give high school coaches, like being the coach of the A&M powerlifting team for a couple of years. Like I would have high school coaches approach me very frequently and they say, what's the
Right.
biggest piece of advice that you have for a high school powerlifting coach? And that's exactly what I tell them. Send your kids that are going to qualify for regionals and state to one meet, let them qualify, and don't allow them to compete. Send them to the meets to help out the other kids that are just competing for fun because they're not that
Mm-hmm.
competitive.
Right.
But the kids that are lifting a lot of weight frequently, that don't need to be lifting it as frequently at meets.
Yeah.
It's just not healthy. I slept for 22 hours, like 22 consecutive hours after a competition one time. And it was probably because it was my third meet in a row.
Yeah. Just tired at that point.
Yeah,
Would you
I went
say
to bed
though?
at 6 and woke up at 2 the next day or 3 the next day, something just ridiculous.
Would you say though, competing so often gives you that relaxed feeling? Because I know before you talked about how everyone seems kind of stressed, especially in a raw meet. You're like everyone's stressed, and you're just out there messing around because it's fun for you, and you don't have that pressure. So do you think going back to the high school days of doing it so often, just it's not special anymore type of thing? Like you just feel comfortable with it.
It's still special, but maybe it's one of those things like the more often you do it, you have maybe even a false sense of security.
Hmm.
Like you feel like you can control the variables more because you've done it so recently.
Right.
You don't really get the meet day jitters.
Hmm.
Uh, but if you're doing a meet once a year and you want to be an elite level lifter, like I don't know, I feel like the meet day jitters can just really screw with you.
Yeah, for sure.
I've got a guy that I'm coaching right now, and he is a top 1%er. He hasn't shown it quite on the platform yet, but he's only been powerlifting for like 2 years, and he's already got an 800-pound wrap squat, and he's a
Pretty good.
308. Like he's a big boy,
Yeah.
probably sub 20% body fat. Like
Hmm.
he's jacked and he's strong,
Yeah.
but he's only competed 3 times.
Just doesn't have that experience yet.
Yeah, no, and I told him, I was like, you need to be getting in 2 or 3 meets a year. I'm like, you can't be shit in the bed because you're scared, because you're
Hmm.
nervous. Like, you need to go in and you need to perform.
Right. So what would you recommend, someone who doesn't have a coach or someone who's not on a team and it's completely up to them? How often would you recommend that they do go and compete?
um, I think twice a year is a comfortable number. I think 6 months total, like prep time,
Hmm.
peaking, that like all of that, I think is
Right.
a good number. Like regardless of your like what level you're at, whether it be bottom 50%, top 10%, like
Hmm.
whatever. Um, you don't want to do it too frequently because it does tax your body,
Right.
and you got to play it safe. You got to be smart about what you're
Hmm.
doing. But at the same time, if you do want to be competitive, you can't let meet day jitters get to you. And in my opinion, the best way to avoid that is to just do it a little bit more frequently.
Just keep going on. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it also gives you something to focus on. Some people are process oriented and some people are goal oriented. And so if you're
Hmm.
goal oriented and you're looking at that total and you just want that total to go up and you want to establish a total on the books,
Hmm.
well, the best way to do that is to have a meet. Like, okay, I've got a meet in 6 months. I need to do this, and this in order to get there. But if you're
Right.
process oriented and you just enjoy the process, I guess it's not as much of a big deal. You can go 2 years without competing. If you enjoy the process of lifting
Yeah.
and the end game total isn't like 100% your goal, well,
Right.
you can probably go a little bit longer.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so with, competing a lot as you have, um, what are some things that you like to do to stay healthy? This is a question, I put out there, ask people, what do they want to know from you? And one of the big things was, how do you stay healthy consistently?
there's a lot of things that play into that. One of which is my training mentality. I'm sure most people have heard the KISS acronym. Keep it simple, stupid. We don't have to do a bunch of random shit in the gym that's just gonna throw our body around in funny ways in order to get stronger. I like to use like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yes, he was a bodybuilder, but like him and his buddies, they were actually strong. They looked good and they were strong. And they did like basic pyramid routines. Like they did some of the simplest shit you can think of.
Right.
And yet they look good and they were strong. And I'm like, why do we have to do all of these crazy variations? Like, why can't we just do squat, bench, and deadlift and then do a couple auxiliaries to work on our weak points? And that's been one of my mentalities as far as training goes that I think has done me a world of good. And then the other thing that I kind of live by is if it hurts when you do that, don't do that.
Don't do that. Yeah.
Like the train through the pain mentality is so stupid. There's some things that you can get away with if you truly understand what's going on. But if you don't understand what's going on and why it's hurting or why it feels funny, you should probably just stop and figure it out before you continue to train. Like something silly, I had a client that bumped into a coffee table and had a bruise on their knee.
Right.
No big deal, no serious damage, nothing like that. And she started squatting. She hit 135 for a set of 5, and she was like, like my knee really hurt doing that. And I was like, the knee that you bruised bumping into the coffee table? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, well, maybe you shouldn't squat if it aggravates that. And she was like, well, nothing's wrong. It's just a bruise. I'm like, I know. I'm like, but a bruise is also inflammation, or like can cause inflammation. And there's like, that's a very sensitive area. If you got extra inflammation on your patellar tendon and it's pulling on your patellar tendon and you're squatting through it anyways, that bruise that'll go away in 48 hours on its own could cause some serious trauma if you keep screwing with it.
Yeah.
So if it hurts when you do that, don't do that.
Yeah. And she might, in that case too, shift her weight to her other side, and now her motor program's all messed up and she doesn't even realize it, but 85% is on the other side.
Yeah. And she's just compensating.
Exactly.
So
what else goes into it? You said keep it simple. You said if it hurts, don't do it. What are some other things that you like to do, either nutrition wise or active recovery? What are some other things that you like to do?
I mean, honestly, I'll be 100% honest. I'm not the best with my nutrition. I follow a more intuitive dietary and training program. I have goals. I typically know ballpark what I need to be eating, what I need to be doing in the gym. And I just kind of go with the flow as long as I'm consistent in what I do. And so I definitely notice changes in the gym and outside of the gym when those things aren't consistent. It doesn't really matter what I'm doing per se. I just need to be consistent about it.
Just kind of staying in tune with your body too. When it feels wrong, adjust.
Well, because if you're consistently eating like shit for 2 weeks and then, like I don't feel as good on a day-to-day basis, like lifting, it's not going bad, but it's not going as good as it could be. It's like, well, you need to evaluate some of the things that you've been doing consistently, whether that be positive or negative.
I think it's key. I think it really is. One of the things you talked upon was accessory lifts. So we had a question from, I'm going to forget this name already. Here we go. It's Mike Sutton. He said, what's your secondary lift for each movement? And I'm sure Mike meant for this to be a very simple question. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I know picking a secondary lift isn't always as easy as it sounds. So take me through squat, bench, deadlift, and what's some things, you're looking at, and then an exercise you like to do to address that weakness.
So I'm just going to be real. I'm a terrible person to ask that question to. So I I wouldn't say this is a good thing or a bad thing, and this is not going to answer the question, and I apologize.
All right.
But just going to be real, I don't really have an answer personally.
Hmm.
But I say starting like my junior year in college, I was already kind of coaching people while also trying to lift and compete at the highest level at that time.
Hmm.
And the one thing that started to suffer was my auxiliary movements. I was doing my squatting, my benching, my pulling.
Hmm.
I was doing all of that. I was getting all of my working sets in, but I was taking like 30 minutes in between sets. Not because I was being lazy or I was tired, but because like everybody and their mother needed or wanted my help.
Right.
And so, my junior, senior year in college, and then subsequently the 2 years thereafter, when I hung around and was coaching, I just kind of stopped doing auxiliary movements.
Gotcha.
And so that just kind of became my routine. That became what was consistent, was just not doing those. And I'd like to say I've made a fair amount of progress despite that. But like I don't have any secondary movements. I do understand that there's a place for them, and I probably should be. And
Hmm.
I'm actively trying to work on that. But as of right now, I can't. I don't have any of those.
Okay. Well,
Um,
I think it's huge too that success breeds clues, and if you're finding that you're doing really well without them, maybe you don't actually need them.
I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah,
I,
it's that type of lifestyle.
I mean, my numbers were still going up. I was staying healthy, and
Mhm.
I could go out on a limb here and say that could possibly be attributed to some extent to me not doing a bunch of auxiliaries. I'm
So you can
only doing
focus
these
more on the
big,
big list.
yeah, and I can increase my frequency. I can increase the intensity a little bit
Hmm.
because I'm not doing other things that are taxing those muscle groups.
Right, that makes sense. All right, getting away from the gym a little bit here in the lifts. One of the things I wanted to ask you is looking at the future of the sport. Where do you see it going? And then what are some things you just in general would like to change about it?
Um, where do I see it going? Well, a lot of people are becoming more invested in the sport.
Hmm.
You know, the the top one percenters are drastically changing. Records are being broken more frequently every
Right.
year. And that's not. I don't think that's necessarily because people are just stronger now than they were before.
Hmm.
Training methodologies. I don't think it has anything to do with that. I think it has to do with the fact that because people are becoming more involved in powerlifting, people are seeing it. They're from a young age, they're seeing it, they're watching it as they grow up, and so they want to be a part of it. And
Right.
so the pool is bigger.
Hmm.
The
I agree.
pool of people joining the sport is bigger. And so as a byproduct of that, more people are willing to put money into it. There's more people hitting big weights. There's more people breaking records. There's just more.
Right.
So
Yeah.
more people, more money, more publicity, more everything.
Hmm.
And the way things are going now, I think that's all this is going to be. Like, there's just going to be these big cash prize money meets for the top one percenters to compete at. And I mean, honestly, maybe even at the local level, more money is going to be funneled in for the lifters. It kind
Hmm.
of seems like that's um, more so in the untested feds. It seems like people are really trying to give back to the lifters
Hmm.
because, like, the lifters put a lot into this,
Right.
and some of them put a lot into it, and maybe their goal isn't to necessarily put on a show for other people. They're doing it for
Hmm.
themselves, but nonetheless they're putting on a show for other
Right.
people, so they should be rewarded for that in other people's eyes.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think the sport is just headed towards more big money meets, like the current US Open and the showdown.
Hmm.
I know the hybrid showdown is going on next month in Miami, and I think Steffi Cohen is also doing like the Krakos Expo or something like
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think those kind of meets, those kind of competitions, those are what are going to keep getting bigger and more frequent, and those are going to be like the the premier events of powerlifting.
Hmm.
getting into the Olympics, totally a long shot. Like that's probably never going to happen for various reasons.
Right.
There's not one Fed. Like there's not one Fed that everybody can agree on, everyone can be under. I believe the IPF, I could be wrong, but I believe they got their IOC recognition a few years ago. And so all that means is technically they are in the pool of sports that could be added to it.
Mm-hmm.
But my 2 cents, I think that was just a publicity thing. They've been pushing for such a long time. And I think the IOC just finally gave in to, maintain relationships and stuff like that. I don't believe that they'll ever actually be added to an Olympic year.
Right.
So that, as far as that being like the future of the sport, I don't think that's going anywhere.
Right.
And then as far as some of the biggest flaws that I've seen, things that I think really need to change, competition standards, man.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not really just talking about judging and stuff like that, inconsistencies in judging, although that is a problem.
But you get that in any sport though. Like you look at baseball and you're like, that's a ball or is that a strike? So for me, that's
It's
just human
subjective.
error. So, it is what it is kind of thing.
Yeah.
We know in baseball where a ball and strike should be. We know in powerlifting what depth should be on squat. So that's a subjective error that's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why I don't even think that's worth like putting into this per se. Like it is what it is. It's never going to change.
Yeah.
But things that could change and need to, in my opinion, people who are hosting meets need to understand what the specifically the big meets, the meets that people want to have a lot of publicity for. This is what I'm specifically referring to. Local meets, smaller scale, you can fudge some things.
Right.
Let's be real. Like it happens. It's a small local meet for a reason. But at those bigger meets, like you can't have bars that are bent. You gotta have the racks in the warm-up room that you're gonna have on the platform. You gotta have the kilo plates in the warm-up room. Like those kind of things, like you gotta have similar to competition standards in the warm-up room, in addition to on the platform.
Yeah,
like that is by far the biggest complaint, the biggest thing that I have. That is not consistent. And that does screw with people. Yes, I'm kind of a princess. I'm going to be real. But, I'll just say it, like the Pioneer Open that I bombed at last July, I do attribute a lot of that to having to warm up on pound plates in the warm-up room. And not only that, but like I digress from that and move over to Dan Bell trying to warm up to 900 something pounds with pound plates. The weights almost didn't fit on the bar. Like you want to talk about the whip on that man's back?
Right.
Like
it's a different feeling.
It's a totally different feeling. It's totally different, and it changes exponentially as the weights get heavier. Like if you're squatting, benching, pulling 300, 400, 500 pounds, like you're not really going to have those problems. The bar is not going to bend uncontrollably. It's not going to whip uncontrollably. But once we start getting that 600, 700, 800, 900 pound range, again, it's exponential.
Yeah.
And so it starts having a bigger effect on those top 1%ers. The people that are lifting more, it hurts them more. So if if the sport wants those people to be happy, wants them to compete at their highest level, well, meet directors need to start taking that into consideration.
Yeah.
That one thing that I will say about the IPF per se, you go to an IPF meet and they say it's an IPF meet, it will be well run. It will be well run. I've been to meets where they've been too well run, and they finished entirely too fast.
Yeah,
and that's not something you ever hear anybody. You do not hear people complain about a meet moving too fast. That's very rare.
You got your small meets taking 12 hours, and you're like, there's 40 people.
No, exactly. And I'm like, I've been through meets that are like world level meets that are 80, 90 lifters, and we literally finished a meet in under 3 hours.
Just incredible.
Yeah, and And it's because like they've got it together at that level. They've got it together, and like that needs to be the standard. That should
Right.
be non-optional. If you're putting up 20, 30, 40, $50,000, okay, well now you're establishing yourself as a high level competition, and you want
Yeah.
high level athletes to be there. So you need to make sure they have what they need in order to perform.
Yeah. You wouldn't expect Alabama football to warm up on a baseball field. You
Yeah,
need the stuff you're going to use. You need the right equipment there.
yeah, no, exactly. I think that's a pretty decent analogy there.
So jumping into some of the Facebook questions we had, this was actually maybe one of my favorite questions. I might say that statement again later, but this came from Damien, and he said, "What's the cost of being great?"
You know, I didn't really notice this so much, like in high school and through college, because I just had so much more free time,
Mm-hmm.
that this was never a factor. But over the past 2 or 3 years, trying to compete at the level that I want to compete at,
Mm-hmm.
finding that work-life balance becomes increasingly hard, or increasingly harder. Like
Mm-hmm.
trying to take care of myself, getting adequate rest, adequate nutrition, adequate training, maintaining a good routine, that becomes hard.
Yeah.
Now that I'm an adult, I'm in the real world. I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not competing in the juniors. I'm not competing at the collegiate division. This is my life,
Mm-hmm.
but there's other aspects of my life that are hard to balance with this, and that's
Right.
that's the biggest struggle, trying to not let anything suffer.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say right now that is by far the biggest challenge that I myself am having, is getting enough time in the gym to do the things I need to, while also providing for me and my wife,
Right.
supporting ourselves. So that's taken a big hit for my lifting in the past. And so once that happened, I started focusing more on that, and then my lifting
Mm-hmm.
took a hit.
Right.
And so that's just been kind of cyclical and going back and forth, while I'm trying to find a perfect balance of all of it, making
Yeah.
enough to support myself and my wife and our dogs, while also being able to adequately perform frequently.
And I think that's something where, you know, powerlifting as a sport can just, they could help out if there are more money meets and there's more money around for the athletes, where a full-time athlete can be a full-time athlete.
Yeah,
You got guys like World's Strongest Men, that's all they do is train and they live very well. We don't have that type of money going around in powerlifting, especially if you're not the number one person all the time.
yeah, and that's where I think some of my inconsistencies have really held me back. Like I could be more profitable as a lifter,
Mm-hmm.
if I could consistently get my shit together, and I
Yeah.
accept that. I'm humble enough to acknowledge that and accept that. Like that's on
Mm-hmm.
me. um but that's one of the things that almost has to happen to an extent,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to stay at the top. Something that I've started to notice is there's an increasing number of top 1%ers that they own their own gym.
Mm-hmm.
They have their own place. They control their own environment. They control everything. And so
Yeah.
because of that, they're able to lift as frequently as they want. They're able to control their clients, their environment. They're
Mm-hmm.
able to support themselves and do all of these things. And it's all grouped into one entity. It all is all one thing. Um,
Right.
and so I think that is something that could help me in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I'm able to control my own environment in its entirety.
For sure. For sure, man. And so with all these, balancing everything around you, gets hard to do that. So what keeps you from being burnt out? Or do you ever feel like you never have that trouble because you just love what you do?
You, you know, I, I've definitely been burnt out before. I think one of the things that really keeps me from being burnt out is being a little bit more intuitive with my training.
Hmm.
And by intuitive, I mean like I know when I need to stop when I'm in the gym. Like even if I'm having a good day, I need to understand my limits. I need to look towards next week. You
Right.
know, like, hey, like yeah, it's going great today. And I could easily do more here. I could do another set. Like, how's it gonna affect me next week? How's it gonna affect me for my next squat day? How's it gonna affect me for my next deadlift day?
Hmm.
And we've got to constantly be aware of those things in order to not be physically burnout. But the the mentally burnout aspect is a little bit harder to control. Um, I a couple years ago, I did my last equipped powerlifting meet, and I
Hmm.
bombed. And it wasn't my last one because I bombed. I think this is actually going to tie into one of the possibly another question you have for me later, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about it anyways. Um, so yeah, I bombed. It was miserable. It was a horrible experience, and it was actually
Right.
the meet that I was talking about. We finished in about 2 hours and 45 minutes
Wow.
from the time we started to the time we finished, and it was an
Hmm.
equipped meet nonetheless. So at an equipped meet, you got to warm up raw. You got to get in your suit, which takes 10, 15 minutes, depending on the
Right.
suit. And then you have to warm up in said suit and then get your ass out on the platform and lift.
Yeah.
And then you have to do that 3 different times.
Yeah.
And I
Takes a
did that in
while.
less and I did that in less than 3 hours, a
Hmm.
whole meet. And I bombed on bench, which was crazy because I had one of the best bench training cycles in a shirt that I'd
Hmm.
had in a very long time. Bench training actually went better than the squat and deadlift training for that meet.
Right.
And so it was so bizarre. And that was one of those moments where I realized this wasn't fun.
Hmm.
This meet was not fun. This sucked. Like even if I hadn't bombed, it still would have been my last equipped meet because it just sucked.
You just didn't
It
find the enjoyment anymore in it.
No, it didn't, and that was like that sudden realization that like I don't know if I didn't associate it with lifting in general. I more associated it with equipped lifting
Hmm.
because if I'm lifting raw and we finish a meet in 3 hours, I might actually be happy about that.
Just get through it.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like it is a little bit, well, it's a lot different raw and equipped, and so I've definitely got burnout on the equipped side, but
Hmm.
getting out when I did has allowed me to still have an appreciation for it and a love for the equipped side of things.
Right.
And who knows, maybe I'll see if I can put up 1,000 kilo total one day, single ply, just for lulz, just
I'm
so I
sure
can
you'll
still
do
do
it.
it, you know. um but yeah, I'd say in order to I guess to summarize,
Hmm.
to not be physically burnt out, you've really got to pace yourself in the gym. You've got to
Hmm.
be a little bit more intuitive. I want to say, I take this with a grain of salt. It's okay to go off program a little bit sometimes, but you can also go off program and undershoot than overshoot if you think it's going to save you for something later that week or
Hmm.
later that month. You know, because it does work that way. It can take up to 30 days for a specific muscle group to completely recover, and you won't even know that. Like you won't even feel it, but it can.
Right.
So understanding that's also kind of important. And then on the mental side of things, I think it still just comes down to the balance of other things in your life too. As much as I want to be at the top and I want to be a champion and I want to always have that mindset, there are other things in life,
Yeah.
and we can't sacrifice all of those things just for lifting, even though
Hmm.
sometimes we want to. You know, I can't sacrifice my relationship with my wife. I can't sacrifice my um like my monetary gains for my physical gains. Like you've got to
Hmm.
have a happy balance or some aspect in your life will get burnt out. And lifting can't be the one because sometimes that's just what gets us through the
Yeah.
day.
That's huge. It's huge.
Yeah.
To keep the somber ambiance going, what's your biggest regret in sport? So the last 11 years, what's the biggest regret that you wish you made a certain pull or made a smart decision or anywhere in the whole thing?
My biggest regret in the sport.
Or are you happy with all the selections you've made and doing sumo over conventional and being called a cheater your whole life? And
uh, that's a really tough one. Not because I have so many regrets,
Mhm,
but because I try and live my life as a whole, like in a way that I don't have any regrets at all.
mhm,
Um, any experience that is negative, that has a negative outcome, can still be positive if you learn something from it. Like you can't
it's huge.
have a bad you can't have a bad day in the gym if you learn something from it. It doesn't matter if you failed a weight that you've done 100,000 times.
Mhm,
Learn why you did that, adapt, and move on. And that
yeah.
was a good day. Like school wasn't fun. School sucked, but a lot of times we learned things. Like that's why we went to
Mhm,
school. We learned things to get better, but it wasn't fun.
right.
So why should lifting be any different? Why should any other aspect of your life be any different? It
Mhm,
sucks. Learn why it sucked and how to not allow it to happen again.
that's
Learn
huge.
from it.
That's huge. All right, we're going to wrap it up here soon. Taking quite a bit of your time. This next part's real quick. This was inspired by the School of Greatness, which is another podcast on YouTube, which has absolutely nothing to do with powerlifting, but I still enjoy it. And on there, he asked for three truths um, at the end of your life. What are three truths that you believe you kind of want to go for in the world? We're going to change it a little bit. So it's actually going to change it a lot a bit, but we're going to go two truths or two advices. So you have a brand new lifter, and then you have someone who's been in it for a few years and kind of that intermediate lifter there. What is one piece of advice you give to both of them to try to become elite, a great lifter?
Technique over everything. Technique over everything. I have a client that I've worked with for a year and a half, and I would not let him put more weight on the bar because his technique just um wasn't where I wanted it to be. And like this kid's 6'2", 240,
Mm-hmm.
and built like a brick shit house. But he's been benching more than he squatted the entire time that we've been working together.
Yeah.
And but now we're finally at a point where his technique is perfect,
Mm-hmm.
and he's been putting on 5-10 pounds on his squat max every 2 weeks
Nice.
for a couple months now,
Yeah.
because we took the time to let his technique get on point.
Mm-hmm.
um, and now he's going to be steadily making gains with that technique for a very long time. He's not going to plateau for a decent amount of time. He's
Right.
not going to hit that wall, because we spent so long building that foundation of like the technique,
Mm-hmm.
that now he can move the weight properly.
Yeah.
And that neural drive, that neural connection is there because we worked on the technique so much, and so he can just keep cruising all the way up.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's the biggest one of the biggest things. Like,
That's huge.
humble yourself with the weight,
Mm-hmm.
and really focus on that technique, because in the long run it's going to pay off. You're going to be healthier and you're going to be stronger.
Love it. So let's say we got someone now. Perfect technique, more or less. Perfect technique is a vague term there. What's the next piece of advice? What are they going to do next? What would you say here? Here's your golden template. Go from here. What do you want them to do? What's your next advice for
um
them?
that's when in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
that's when it's going to come down to the training program, or who your coach is.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I've recently learned about myself and some of my other lifters is, once you reach that point where you are at a plateau and you are at essentially your capacity for maybe your body weight,
Mm-hmm.
you're lifting as much as you possibly can with good technique, with the weight that you have, with the mass that you have. Oh my God. What was the question again? I had a brain fart. I'm sorry.
So like once they get their good technique there, what's the next piece of advice you give them?
Oh yeah. So, you want to start trying to figure out how to add, like additional motor units.
Mm-hmm.
Like how can you incorporate new muscle groups into these lifts in order to produce more power? Now that's more of an advanced like methodology, idea, concept, whatever
Right.
you want to call it. Something that I've been tinkering with myself. But I'd say aside from that, that's when the training program is going to really become a lot more important. You can run if you're a beginner or even an intermediate lifter, you can run Wimler's 5-3-1 or do a simple 5x5 and do linear periodization. And as long as your technique's on point, you're going to keep getting stronger. That doesn't really stop working until you are that advanced athlete, until you become that like as built for your frame as what you can be.
Right.
So I say it comes down to recruiting more muscles and then training program whenever you're at that level.
Gotcha there. All right, so wrapping it up here, what are your upcoming plans? What's your next meet that you got lined up for yourself?
So due to some recent injuries, I've dropped out of the meet that I planned on doing here at the 2 or 3 weeks, the beginning of February. I'm just going to take it slow and build towards the US Open. I would really like to take the 2K or Cody Blazek's 2K in wraps. And then eventually Hacks 2K Raw without wraps at the Showdown in September.
Yeah, some big numbers there.
Yeah, I've got high hopes for myself, but we got to set that bar high. We got to have something to strive for sometimes.
Right. All right. So where can people find you? Yeah.
Instagram is really the only place that I'm on. I really don't like Facebook for various reasons. Yeah, Instagram, Blake _ 75 kg. I'm not a 75 kg anymore. I've got big plans. I definitely want to rebrand my whole Instagram, and I've got plans for that coming up shortly. And I don't want to change my Instagram handle twice within like a month's period of time. So I'm just going to leave it be, and people can think I'm smaller than I am for a little while. That's fine.
All right. So if you're watching this in the future and you can't find him, just search his name and it might be a different title there. He'll show up eventually.
Yeah, you'll find me. The little Dan Green. It's what I should change my Instagram handle to. Not, but I should.
Yeah. All right, man. I appreciate you taking the time today. Hope people kind of learned a lot from you and can inspire me more like you, because you've done a lot of great things, and I'm really excited to keep watching you do great things. And then maybe I'll see you one more time this year. If not, probably next year we have to.
That's we can meet our 2022 quota,
Right. All right, man. You take care.
You too, man. I appreciate you having me, and look forward to maybe doing this again sometime. Yeah, I've got 2 raw and 1 equipped.
Okay.
And then a silver. First loser.